In our first lesson, we will start with some basics. What is economic development? Can a locality actually do anything about their economic circumstances? Why bother? The learning objectives for this lesson is to offer some basic definitions and introduce you to broad concepts that we will explore in detail throughout the semester. Please remember that if you are having trouble with material any time this semester, you can engage with your classmates through the discussion board and chat functions, or reach out to me. I am more than happy to engage with you to facilitate your learning experience this semester. Dr. Keith Waters, a recent PhD graduate from the Schar School, and who will be helping me with this semester, looked at long-run economic trends in his dissertation using agent-based modeling. One of his interesting findings was that the distribution of the U.S. population across cities, when mathematically transformed into a log-log function, is effectively linear. This means that the big cities attract the most people and become even relatively bigger. Of course, it is not a perfect model, but it raises the laissez-faire question: growth happens through natural and market processes, so why waste the effort in trying to change what will happen anyway? Why fight the river? Go with the flow. Chapter 1 in your textbook addresses several of the reasons to not simply go with the flow, which I will largely leave for your reading. In this lecture, I will cover a few of the reasons, but will add some additional issues for your consideration. Some of the advantages of large urban areas include economies of scale. You can have lots of variety in the goods of services if the market is larger. And this applies to everything from the number and types of restaurants and retailers, the variety and diversity of parks and other public amenities, to transportation modes that are available for getting around town. Perhaps most importantly, more people allows for deeper and wider social capital, which we will talk about later. Having said that, there are obvious disadvantages that emerge as cities become larger and larger. Traffic congestion, concentration of crime, high housing cost, and more broadly, high cost of living, which of course, if you're living in the Washington, D.C. area, you know something about. Perhaps most importantly, the simple fact is that not all of us want to live in New York City. We have family and cultural reasons for wanting to stay in a particular region. The philosopher Durkheim talked about place bonding. Place bonding can come from many sources, including cultural activities. So, for example, a sport team can create place bonds. Think of the Dallas Cowboys, the Montreal Canadiens, or the LA Lakers. This place bonding does not require large cultural amenities, but can also be developed through the feel or the vibe of a small town. Therefore, even when market forces, which we will call cumulative causation in a couple of weeks, are seeming to drive overall economic growth, we have social, economic, equity, and other reasons for taking action to change the structure of the economy that will not efficiently occur through market forces alone. Also, because of the relative rapidity of change in the modern economy, there are opportunities for localities and regions to shift comparative and competitive advantages so that economic growth can be directed and managed to create economic development and economic opportunity. While manufacturing still contributes greatly to overall economic activity, developed nations have been shifting their activity and employment to advanced, high value-added services. For example, there was really no cybersecurity industry outside of government until the early 1990s, which is, of course, a lifetime for many of you. But in the scale of national economies, not really that long. China, though still relatively small on a per capita basis, has become the second largest economy in the world, eclipsing Japan and the EU in a very short time period. The emergence of India as an economic powerhouse, not just a supplier of talent for U.S. tech firms, as well as Brazil, Vietnam, and others, is changing the flow of goods and services on a global scale. This change has been fostered to a large degree by trade liberalization, which codifies our inalienable right to be able to go to Walmart and buy a big screen TV for $500 or less. But perhaps the biggest disruption and opportunity currently underway is that we are slowly coming around to the realization that natural resources are finite, and that if economic growth is more geographically dispersed across the world, then we are potentially all going to suffer the consequences of the negative spillovers of environmental degradation. If we accept that it is possible to alter existing economic trajectories, what we sometimes call path dependencies, can we also address market failures? The simple matter is, not all places gain from national level economic growth. Your current well-being and opportunities are increasingly tied to your specific place. This process holds for regional, state levels of geography, localities, and by which we usually mean cities or equivalent government structures, and even neighborhoods. The conclusion here is that places matter. Economic development is influenced by, but not defined by events. Economic development is a process, and quite frankly, it is a process that has no end. Arlington achieved a huge economic development win by being selected as the site for Amazon's second North American headquarters. But consider what this win means. The presence of HQ2 will help attract other businesses who are similar to Amazon or sell their services to Amazon. However, with a workforce that is expected to total 25,000 at full development, HQ2 is going to attract workers from across the nation, and maybe across the world if we don't cut off our visa programs, but will also recruit employees away from existing Arlington and other Northern Virginia firms. In the face of competition for an already tight labor market for tech talent, will the arrival of Amazon drive out other companies? Amazon's economic development strategies need to adapt for the opportunities and the threats created by this huge win. Economic growth occurs when total output and income rises. But economic development is more than just the money. While economic growth is a necessary condition for economic development, growth in total income or output by itself is not sufficient to achieve economic development. And it's not just business wealth, which we talk about in terms of sales and company stock values, but also community wealth. It's rising standards of living that leads to enhanced quality of life. Now let me be clear, this is not socialism or communism or Robin Hood philosophies to redistribute wealth to the masses. We are talking about equality, true equality, in opportunity. Personal responsibility is still important, but collectively, community action should be about the community not creating benefits for narrowly defined groups. In other words, well-crafted mission statements and value statements for local and regional economic development entities will have equity built into their goals, even if the word equity does not appear explicitly in these statements. The International Economic Development Council, a professional association for economic development practitioners, defines economic development as local economic development is the process by which localities enhance the quality of life of their residents and the local tax base by creating new community and business wealth through the creation, expansion, and retention of jobs. Note, it implicitly recognizes the value and importance of the services provided by regional and local governments that are paid for through taxes, and explicitly notes it's not just about companies and that the primary outcome relates to jobs. If I were to expand on this definition, I would probably include the notion of living wages while recognizing that some jobs are meant to be entry-level jobs, not career aspirations. Chapter 1 includes a discussion of two important viewpoints about the relative value of doing economic development planning and activities at the local level. While I do not want to just repeat the arguments Dr. Beer and I make in the book, I want to add a little nuance that illustrates potential traps and problems with local and regional economic development efforts while still supporting the value of local action. The OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, an international body with 37 developed nation members who run programs addressing economic opportunity and social well-being across the globe, issued a series of papers that largely offered the conclusion that economic development strategic planning and actions should be done at the national level. They go so far as to conclude that local and regional economic development actions actually detract from national development because local and regional, think state when we mean regional here, actions are zero-sum games. If Toyota relocates from California to Texas, California loses jobs, Texas gains jobs. The total number of jobs in the U.S., theoretically, does not change. Focusing on local strategies can lead to the misallocation of resources. One famous example of this kind of misallocation is what became known as the Bridge to Nowhere in Alaska. In 2006, when earmarked pork barrel spending was still the norm for congressional appropriations, the transportation funding bill included allocations of more than $400 million to build a bridge and related highway infrastructure to connect the town of Ketchikan, Alaska, population of about 8,000, to Gravino Island, which is the location of Ketchikan's airport. In addition to hosting Alaska's second busiest airport, Gravino Island is home to about 50 total residents. Access to this island is by ferry, which runs roughly every half hour and costs about $6 to $7 to ride each way. Building the bridge was made more expensive by the need for it to be high enough to allow large cruise ships to pass underneath, since the channel is a part of the Alaska's Inward Passage, and required building a tunnel underneath the runways at Ketchikan Airport. In addition to making access to the airport easier and cheaper, since the federal government would pay construction costs, a main purpose of the bridge was to open up parts of Gravino Island for development. The bridge was never actually built, with the funds eventually being used to pay for reconstruction projects in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina. However, the road from Ketchikan to the waterfront where the bridge was going to be built was constructed at a cost of about $28 million. Though there is really no reason for any traffic to be on this stretch of road. And in fact, many pieces of that road, as I understand, are not even paved. It's just still dirt road. Even though the bridge project was officially canceled in 2015, the bridge, now road to nowhere, is still held up as the poster child for misallocation of public funds meant to encourage local economic development. Another big challenge, and you will hear me rail against this problem throughout the semester, just fair warning, is corporations playing local and state governments off of each other to get better incentives, special treatments, or other perks. A regional headquarters for a division of PepsiCo got $1 million for relocating their offices from Addison, Texas to Plano, Texas. For those of you not familiar with the Dallas suburbs, Addison and Plano are actually located next to each other. The physical move was about 1 mile, moving from one existing building to another existing building. This is a beggar thy neighbor approach to economic development at the extreme. In recent years, no one has played the rent-seeking game of corporate site locations as well as Elon Musk. The state of Nevada gave Tesla a $1.2 billion incentive package in exchange for locating a car battery factory in that state. A state that already has some of the most corporate-friendly tax structures in the nation. More recently, Mr. Musk has been playing public officials in Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Texas like a fiddle in competition for the assembly plant for the new Tesla pickup. Austin, Texas wound up winning this round of the economic development competition. These examples show the downside of local and regional economic development efforts, but there are ways to fix these problems that we will discuss throughout the semester. Still, the World Bank suggestions that we should just accept that some places will flourish while others decline and eventually fail, demonstrating economic lumpiness, as they call it, is not particularly empirically or socially sound. Indeed, much of the efforts of the OECD and World Bank are meant to correct market imperfections and varying capacities for nations to deliver economic opportunity and quality of life for their citizens. Not recognizing that these processes occur at the subnational geographies is basically sticking your head in the proverbial sand. Our view, that we share with many, is that spatially blind policies can also lead to the misallocation of resources, failing to recognize that even lagging regions can contribute to national economic development and growth. And most importantly, in a changing world, you can miss out on opportunities that could be derived from regional shifts in economic specialization. Adapting to new opportunities is usually best done in stages and in relatively small bites. As the saying goes, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Many of the regions within the Midwest of the United States have seen falling population and related economic challenges. Yet agricultural production is a huge contributor to net U.S. exports, and these regions have become not only the sources of agricultural production, but the test beds for innovation, from developing crops that require less irrigation to the deployment of robots that autonomously take care of weeds in crop fields without the use of widely broadcasting chemical sprays. We feel the evidence suggests that local and regional development can be effective and in many respects the most economically and socially efficient way to support national economic development. However, as illustrated by the challenges presented in the previous slide, to achieve success for the whole, we have to pay close attention to how the assets are used, how various agencies and actors interact with one another, cooperation, competition, because competition is still good to enforce innovation, and what one person I used to work with described as co-opetition. Now, co-opetition is a horrible word, but interestingly, this non-word is actually recognized by spell checkers now. how cooperation among the various actors across levels of government and between government and the private sector work with each other can create synergies that enhance overall economic performance and national economic competitiveness. So what do economic development professionals do? We can generally categorize their activities into three buckets: attraction, retention, and development. Attraction includes recruiting an existing firm to move from some other place to your home community. This type of activity gets most of the political and media attention because of the scale. If I can convince a company to shift its operations from somewhere else, the receiving community gets a boost in jobs, oftentimes a large-scale boost in jobs, 500, 1,000, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 jobs. Or in the case of Amazon HQ2, 25,000 jobs. The headline may read, Chicago lands Boeing corporate headquarters, as we showed on a previous slide. Or Toyota relocates its North American headquarters from Los Angeles to the Dallas area. It also includes attracting new large corporate investments, like Mercedes-Benz auto production facility in Alabama, Tesla's battery production plant in Nevada, or SpaceX building a launch facility in South Texas. Business retention is, as suggested earlier, trying to keep a company from moving away. This can be a large employer like the Boeing or Toyota, or even small companies. It requires a good deal of effort, but unfortunately does not get the same level of attention from politicians or the press until the local economy loses a large employer. Too late to make a difference. Business development includes both working with companies to support their ability to grow, expansion if you will, and the creation of new companies. There is increasing focus in recent years on enhancing the entrepreneurial ecosystem for regions. We will talk about what that means later in the semester. We describe this as the three-legged stool because your overall objectives can only be reached if there is a balance across all three types of activities. If one activity is missing, the strategy will collapse. Though it's possible that you could stay upright for some period of time if you think about balancing on a two-legged stool, but know that just any little push in any one direction is going to topple you over. The other is if you place too much emphasis on one area, the legs are not equal, and again, your balance and your stability is compromised. We talk about this in terms of economic resiliency. In practice, these activities are intertwined more than is suggested by this imagery that I've offered to you here. The DC region, for example, is not widely considered to be a hotbed of entrepreneurial activity. Remember, we're a government town made up mostly of bureaucrats, which is the antithesis of entrepreneurialism. However, a study done by Jonathan Aberman, who is currently Dean of Marymount University's Business School and an upcoming guest to this class, and a frequent collaborator with me, reported that about over 20 years, the DC region saw the creation of more than 100 firms that eventually sold for more than $1 billion. However, the region only retained about 7 of those firms after their acquisitions. We will discuss the whys of this outcome with Dean Aberman later. A well-designed, community-engaged economic development strategy that is effectively implemented can create wide-ranging outcomes, including helping regional economies grow and become more resilient, capitalize on their locational assets, strengthen the entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystems, which of course will enhance overall competitiveness, reduce and eventually minimize poverty by, in part, increasing access to opportunity, make use of assets in an effective way, which includes community as well as corporate assets, attract private sector investment, strengthen and broaden the tax base, allowing local and regional governments to provide better services and amenities. And, of course, as we go through the semester, we will talk about other potential outcomes. So, including this lecture segment, what are some of our key takeaways for why economic development strategies and tactics should include a local and regional perspective? Economic development empowers a community to shape its future. A community is a geographic and social construct that allows for differences in views and priorities. One size does not fit all. The economic effects of globalization are playing out at the local level. The former director of Fairfax County Economic Development Office used to frequently note that his main competitors are London, Berlin, Tokyo, not Atlanta, Dallas, or even Chicago. The speed at which the economy is changing due to the creation, dissemination, and adoption of technology cannot be done efficiently on a national scale. Just like a smaller ship is much more nimble than a supertanker, you find that a local economy can change directions much more readily than the national economy as a whole. In my training at the Texas Maritime Academy, they taught us that if two supertankers are on a collision course at a distance of 5 miles, they will almost certainly hit each other because it takes too long to turn a vessel that large. Well, this same applies to the structure of our national economy. Because of this relative nimbleness, local and regional economies can act upon emerging opportunities and avoid the worst effects of natural cycles of industry growth and decline. Please take a break now and then move on to part 2 of this lecture.